In the monastery of Sedong, an atmosphere of tension and distress reigns. Denson, the child Lama, has been removed and sequestered. To free his new friend, Indiana Jones, mindless of the danger, will face those the Buddhist monks call the harmful demons in Young Indiana Jones and the Child Lama.
Hello, and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I'll be reviewing the last of the fan translations for the French-exclusive Young Indie novels. This is, of course, the new fan translation by the fan Right Guard of Young Indiana Jones and the Child Lama. Now, this book was published in 1998 and is part of a short-lived run of original Young Indie stories that were published alongside French reprints of the Random House Young Indie original stories. So when you try to find these, of course, they are very difficult to track down and were only ever published in French. So these fan translations are wonderful because they also give us a nice version of the original cover and retain the couple of internal illustrations that you find in these books. Now, these books were ostensibly for kids, and they're not particularly very long, so the plots are rather straightforward. But you do have a good sense of action and adventure, of historical locale, but the best aspect of these books is always the relationship between Henry Sr. and Henry Jones Jr., and how we get to see more of their father-son dynamic and how they get on each other's nerves, but also begrudgingly admit their affection for one another. But this is giving us more of the context and how their relationship will deteriorate and eventually break apart entirely. So that's the real draw of these books, that you get some fun, basic adventure storytelling with the character that feels a bit more grounded in the world of the films than the Chronicles TV series did at points, but also working in some elements of real history and giving a reason for the Joneses to be off in some remote corner of the world, and some nice loose connectivity with the other original books in this series, with occasionally a mention of some stuff that might have happened in the Random House books. But these books are really sort of their own side series. They don't really connect all that much with the Random House books. Now, the books have been translated by a number of different fans in different ways, and Child Lama was the one that just didn't have a translation. So this has been done, again, entirely by a fan, and this translation was done by the use of online translators and AI tools. It is very well done. I didn't notice any problems with the text in reading it, and it's wonderful that we're now able to read all of the French-exclusive Young Indie adventures in a translated form. This new translation is freely available. I'll leave links in the description below if you want to read it yourself. It's nicely in a PDF, so you can just read it and, of course, get the original cover and illustrations as well. The plot is, again, rather simple, as all these books are. If you've seen my videos covering the other books in this series, you'll know that it's going to be a very straightforward plot going in. The Joneses find themselves on a journey through Tibet, which of course means hell on earth for Henry Jones Sr., world's foremost cranky academic, making his way on a treacherous route on a pack animal. Their journey is made all the more treacherous by it being led by a particular army official who just for some reason doesn't like them at all and does not want them to get to their final destination of a particular Buddhist temple with a really fascinating library of rare text and antiquities for Henry Jones Sr. to study. On this dangerous trek, they meet up with the child Lama, who is also traveling to this place. The child, who is wise beyond his years and directly linked to the Dalai Lama, is named Denson, and is a sort of obviously spiritual or holy figure to all the others on this journey. He and Young Indy develop a nice bond, but unfortunately Denson is kidnapped and then ostensibly being held for ransom, and it's the Joneses who are fingered as the ones responsible for his kidnapping and capture. So without any further ado, they are essentially thrown in a prison cell, and things aren't looking so good for the Joneses. With the aid of another new young friend of Indy and and the good word of a female archaeologist adventurer who's apparently an old acquaintance of Henry Sr., the Joneses are eventually let out of prison, and young Indy determines he's going to find exactly where Denson the child llama is being held captive and rescue him himself. And of course, do this against the wishes of his father, who doesn't want his son to get into mischief once again. So it does continue some of the themes we've seen in the other French books. It fits in perfectly, and the final act finds Indy and companion traveling off to an area that is supposedly haunted by demons. So there's at least a little tinge of a potential supernatural vibe to give it that indie flavor. And overall, I think this book, while it is rather short and to the point, is very effective. It's well written enough, it moves at a nice pace, and even though the plot is simple, it winds up, I think, being one of the more effective of these books. And I think that's because there's not much room to play with in terms of page count, and there's enough action beats and moments of levity with young Indy and Henry Sr. for it to work well enough. So I would say this is probably one of the best of the French adventure books. And on top of that, the final climactic sequence is a classic Indy moment because it's young Indy on a treacherous rope bridge that's being cut. So there are plenty of nods to Temple of Doom in the final action sequence, which is quite nice. And it manages to do this without just repeating the rope bridge scene from Temple of Doom. It does its own version of that. And of course, things are a little bit more treacherous in a way because it's young Indy instead of adult Indy. Indy is shown to be resourceful, which is in character. He manages to even acquire a whip because he wasn't traveling with his trusty whip. There's a good antagonist in the Lieutenant Nyak Tso, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The side characters are interesting, and one just wishes that this book was a little bit longer and had some more plot detailing to make it feel a little bit more fleshed out. That's really my only issue with these books, is that they're for kids and they're very short in length, so there's just not much room to develop the plot past a certain point. This one is, I think, again, one of the better ones because it doesn't suddenly go over into something that's in the supernatural, and also there are allusions to other books. There is a reference, for example, to basically Indy telling the child llama about something that happened to him that was really crazy in the book Sacred Meteorite. So an Indy fan will have a good time with this in terms of going in expecting it to be a very simple and short, straightforward plot. I would say my only points of note in terms of potential criticism with this one is that the ending does feel a tad rushed, and at one point the antagonist says something to the effect of his motivation for his villainy, and that's just sort of dropped. So I'm not for certain if that was meant to be the villain just making something up, or that was his actual motivation and the book just drops that like a hot potato. The other thing is there is a moment where, in order to try and get out of the prison cell, Indy is forced to choose whether or not he'll give up his beloved fedora, which is referred to as a Stetson in this book. He chooses to keep the hat, obviously, as it's Indy's hat, but then at the end of the book, he winds up giving his hat to the child llama anyway, which is really bizarre when you read it, because if it's supposed to be Indy's trademark lucky fedora, he obviously never gets rid of that, so it doesn't quite make sense. And it, of course, breaks continuity. So one can only conclude that for this book, he was just wearing a different hat because of the terrain, and maybe it was an actual Stetson, I don't know. But that was really weird and unexpected. You get to that last bit at the end of the book, and you're like, wait, is Indy going to give away his lucky hat? And then he does, and you're like, what? That doesn't make sense. So that's probably the most continuity breaking moment in any of these French books. The cover has the same design aesthetic as the others in this series, so they match quite nicely with the title in a green box on the top and a white background. We have a stylized sort of cartoon image of young Indy. The image is depicting the ending climax on the rope bridge just as Indy is halfway across, where the llama has reached the other side, only to be confronted by the corrupt, villainous lieutenant, who then cuts the ropes on the bridge, trying to send young Indy to his death. So it's a nice image. It's got great composition, nice color, and definitely makes you want to actually read the book because you realize that's young Indy about to plunge from a rope bridge that's just been cut on one side. So that's really about it, since this is another of these French books and they are all very straightforward and to the point. It's only one or two that have some more outlandish elements or some darker elements that don't feel quite like a kid's book, or the ones that have some elements of magic and mysticism and the supernatural that seem way out there, like Sacred Meteorite did. So these are very much just straightforward to the point adventures to read, and now we have the ability to actually read them in terms of not having to track down the very rare and pricey and difficult to find French original paperbacks and then having to translate them to English. So thanks to the fan translator Rightguard for making this available and doing this nice translation. Again, I'll have a link to the new translation in the description below if you want to check this out, and I would recommend all indie fans check out these translated French books, as it gives further insight to the world of young Indy, and overall I think they slot rather nicely into the idea of the character and the character's chronology, even if they may not 100% line up with the actual official canon. I think they provide greater context for the Henry Sr. and Jr. relationship, the father-son dynamic, and I think the adventures are well done and they fit what a young boy could get into. I don't think they're ever as engaging or striking as the Random House young indie books, but I think they stand on their own quite well and should be read and enjoyed by indie fans everywhere now that we have these wonderful fan translations. So all thanks go to the wonderful fans who tracked down the original French text and then did these wonderful translations and made them freely available for all of us indie nerds to enjoy. So as always, I hope my babblings about the printed world of Indiana Jones and the further indie expanded universe has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you've read and enjoyed the other fan translations in this series like I have, then finally getting the last untranslated book in a translation is a really great sight to see, and something that I didn't think would happen until somebody was able to actually get around to finishing it. So thanks to Rightguard for stepping in and making this translation and making it available. As always, please do keep supporting your local independent bookstores by hopefully being able to find some wonderful indie books and comics. So keep reading printed books, keep cracking the whip, and thank you ever so much for watching.